The room erupted with laughter before I even understood what had been said. I looked around the dinner table, searching for one familiar face that might stop it, but every pair of eyes was fixed on me. I took a slow sip of water, placed the glass down, and realized that after tonight, nothing in our family would ever be the same. My name is Nia, and I was 35 years old. For many years, people had asked me the same questions. Why aren't you married? When will we attend your wedding? I always smiled and gave a short answer because I did not want to argue with anyone. My mother invited the whole family to her house for Sunday dinner. She told me it would be a quiet evening where everyone could relax and enjoy time together. I believed her, so I happily went. At first, everything felt normal. We ate dinner, shared stories, and laughed together. I thought maybe this time would be different. After we finished dessert, my younger sister, Zuri, suddenly looked at everyone with a big smile. Then she laughed and said I had become the family's permanent bridesmaid because no man wanted a woman who cared more about work than marriage. The whole table burst into laughter. My uncles laughed. My aunties laughed. Even my cousins smiled as if it was the funniest joke they had ever heard. I looked at my mother, hoping she would stop them. Instead, she smiled and slowly nodded her head. Then she said I should lower my standards before I became too old to find a husband. More laughter filled the room. I forced myself to smile because I did not want anyone to see how much their words hurt me. I quietly picked up my glass and took a sip of water while everyone continued talking about my life, as if I was not even sitting there. They joked about my future, my age, and my career without caring how I felt. In that moment, I realized I had spent years staying silent just to keep peace in the family. But as I placed my glass back on the table, I knew something inside me had finally changed. I could not stay silent anymore. The conversation kept going as if I was invisible. Nobody noticed that I had stopped smiling. Everyone was busy talking about my younger sister Zuri. My aunt said she had the perfect husband. My cousin said she was lucky to have such a beautiful family. My mother proudly talked about Zuri's vacations, expensive clothes, and happy married life. Every compliment for her was followed by another comparison with me. They said I spent too much time at work. They said I cared more about my career than building a family. Some even joked that I would become the rich aunt who lived alone with no one beside her. Every word felt heavier than the last, but I stayed quiet. As I listened, memories started filling my mind. 2 years earlier, when my mother became seriously ill, I was the one who paid every hospital bill without telling anyone. I used my savings because I wanted her to recover. I never asked for the money back. When my father's business was close to failing, I quietly paid his debts so he would not lose everything he had worked for. He never had to beg anyone for help because I stepped in before anyone even knew there was a problem. Then I remembered Zuri's last year at university. She had almost dropped out because she could not pay her tuition fees. She cried in my apartment, afraid her dreams were over. I paid every remaining bill without asking for anything in return. I even worked extra hours for months so I could recover the money I had spent. No one at this table knew the full story because I never wanted my kindness to become a way of making people feel guilty. I always believed that real family did not keep score. Love was supposed to be given freely, without expecting praise or rewards. That was how I had lived my whole life. But as I looked around the table that night, I realized something painful. The people I had protected the most were the same people who now laughed at me without a second thought. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask before. Why was I working so hard to protect people who had never tried to protect me? I slowly stood up from my chair and looked around the table. The laughter stopped when they saw the expression on my face. For the first time that evening, everyone became quiet. I took a deep breath and said there was something I had never told anyone in the family. My mother looked surprised. Zuri folded her arms and waited. Everyone watched me without saying a word. I told them they were wrong about me. I was not unmarried because no man wanted me. 5 years earlier, I had been engaged to a wonderful man. His name was the happiest part of my life, and together we had planned our future. We had chosen our wedding date, booked the venue, and dreamed about the home we would build together. I truly believed we would grow old side by side. Then, only 3 weeks before our wedding, everything changed. He became sick, and after several medical tests, the doctors told us he had a very aggressive illness. Our wedding plans ended that same day. The invitations, the decorations, and the celebrations no longer mattered. Instead of meeting with wedding planners, we spent our days sitting in hospital waiting rooms. Instead of talking about our honeymoon, we talked to doctors and prayed for better news. I stayed beside him every single day. I held his hand through every treatment and every difficult moment. I never left because I loved him with all my heart. We kept hoping for a miracle, but it never came. A few months later, he passed away before we could become husband and wife. After he was gone, I could not find the strength to talk about what had happened. I did not want my pain to become another story people whispered about at family gatherings. I wanted to keep those memories private because they were precious to me. So I buried my grief and carried it alone for years. When I finished speaking, nobody laughed anymore. Every face around the table had changed. My mother's smile disappeared, and the room became so quiet that no one knew what to say next. Before anyone could say a single word, we heard someone quietly clear his throat near the front door. Every person at the table turned to look. Standing there was Kwesi, my late fiancé's older brother. He was holding a large family photo album in his hands. For a moment, I could not believe my eyes. I had completely forgotten that I had left the album with his family years ago. He had come to return it, never expecting to walk into such a painful moment. Kwesi slowly walked into the dining room. He greeted everyone politely, but his face was serious. It was clear that he had heard enough of the conversation to understand what had happened. He looked at me first with kindness, then turned toward my mother. Nobody interrupted him because the room had become completely silent. He gently held up the photo album and said, "I came to return something that belongs to Nia. But before I leave, there is something all of you need to know." He looked directly at my mother and spoke with a calm but steady voice. Nia was never abandoned. No man walked away from her. She chose to stay beside my brother until his very last breath. I watched her sit with him through endless hospital visits. I watched her encourage him when he had no strength left. She never complained, never gave up, and never left his side. I have met many people in my life, but I have never met anyone stronger or more loyal than Nia. Nobody moved after hearing his words. My mother lowered her eyes. Zuri's smile disappeared, and she could no longer look at me. My relatives who had laughed only minutes earlier now looked ashamed. Some stared at their plates, while others avoided looking at anyone. Kwesi then turned to me and handed me the photo album with both hands. His voice became softer as he said, "My brother always believed you deserved a life filled with love and respect. He would never want anyone to judge you without knowing the truth." I accepted the album with trembling hands. Tears filled my eyes, but I did not speak. The silence around the table felt heavier than all the laughter that had filled the room before. At that moment, everyone finally understood that they had judged a story they had never cared enough to learn. Kwesi stepped closer and gently placed the old photo album into my hands. I looked down at its worn cover, and memories I had tried to bury came rushing back. For a few seconds, I could not bring myself to open it. My hands were shaking. I took a deep breath and slowly turned the first few pages. There were pictures of happier days, when life was filled with hope and plans for the future. Then I noticed a folded envelope carefully tucked between the pages. Kwesi quietly said, "My brother asked me to keep that letter safe. He told me to give it to you only when I believed you were truly ready to read it. I think today is that day." I carefully opened the envelope. The handwriting was immediately familiar. The moment I saw it, tears filled my eyes. It felt as if he was speaking to me again after all those years. I slowly began reading the letter. He thanked me for standing beside him when life became difficult. He wrote that many people choose comfort when things become hard, but I had chosen love instead. He thanked me for every hospital visit, every long night, every prayer, and every moment I stayed beside him without complaining. He said I had given him peace during the hardest time of his life. Then I reached the final part of the letter. He wrote that if I was reading those words, he hoped I had started living again. He asked me never to let anyone decide my value because of my marital status. He reminded me that my kindness, loyalty, and courage were far greater than any wedding ring. He wanted me to remember that I was enough exactly as I was. I carefully folded the letter and held it close to my heart. I did not need to explain anything because everyone around the table had already seen the truth written on my face. My family watched me in complete silence. No one made another joke. No one had another opinion to share. For the first time, they realized there had been a whole chapter of my life filled with love, heartbreak, sacrifice, and courage. They had judged me for years without ever caring enough to ask what I had been carrying inside all along. After I folded the letter, nobody spoke for several long moments. The silence felt very different now. It was no longer filled with laughter. It was filled with regret. Then one of my aunties slowly looked at me and shook her head. She said she suddenly remembered how many family birthdays and holiday dinners I had quietly left early. At the time, everyone believed I was too busy with work. Now she realized I had probably been going to the hospital instead. Another cousin nodded and said he remembered seeing me at a coffee shop late at night with my laptop open and stacks of papers beside me. He had asked why I looked so tired, and I had simply smiled and said everything was fine. Looking at me now, he understood that I had been working 2 jobs while also caring for the man I loved. He admitted that he had never imagined how much I had been carrying by myself. One by one, more relatives began sharing small memories. Each memory revealed another piece of the truth. They remembered seeing me exhausted but always smiling. They remembered me refusing help and never talking about my own problems. They realized I had spent years protecting my private pain while pretending everything was normal. Then my father slowly looked down at the table. His voice was quiet as he admitted that he had noticed the dark circles under my eyes many years ago. He remembered asking if I was getting enough sleep, but when I said I was fine, he never asked another question. He lowered his head and said he should have cared enough to keep asking. His words filled the room with even more sadness. The story my family had believed for years began falling apart right in front of them. I had not failed to marry. I had chosen love, loyalty, and sacrifice during the hardest season of my life. Zuri could no longer sit there with the same confidence. The smile she had worn earlier was completely gone. This time, nobody laughed at her jokes. Instead, several relatives turned toward her and quietly asked how she could make fun of someone without knowing the truth. For the first time that evening, the questions were no longer directed at me. They were directed at the people who had judged me without ever trying to understand my life. Later that evening, after everyone had become quiet, my mother slowly stood up from her chair. She looked around the table, then looked at me. Her face was no longer filled with confidence. She looked tired, and for the first time that night, she seemed ready to tell the truth. She took a deep breath and admitted there was something she had hidden from everyone for many years. She said she had always pushed me to get married, not because she believed I could not live a happy life alone, but because she was afraid of what other people would say. Every time neighbors, relatives, or friends asked why her oldest daughter was still unmarried, she felt embarrassed. Instead of ignoring their opinions, she allowed their words to control the way she treated me. She cared too much about how her family looked in front of others, and without realizing it, she had placed that burden on my shoulders. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes and admitted that she had been unfair. She said she had spent years trying to protect her own reputation instead of protecting her daughter. She confessed that every time she pressured me about marriage, she believed she was fixing a problem. Now she finally understood that the real problem had never been me. It had been her fear of being judged by other people. Her words hit me harder than every joke I had heard that evening. For years, I had wondered if something was wrong with me. I had questioned my choices, my future, and even my worth. I kept believing I had disappointed my family simply because my life had followed a different path. Now I finally understood the truth. The weight I had been carrying was never mine to carry. I had spent years blaming myself for someone else's fears and insecurities. That realization brought both sadness and relief. I looked at my mother and saw someone who had allowed society's opinions to become more important than her own daughter's happiness. No one around the table spoke. They had all heard the truth with their own ears. At that moment, everyone understood that the deepest wound had not come from being unmarried. It had come from knowing that my own mother had cared more about public opinion than about my heart. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. For the first time in many years, I stopped thinking about how to make everyone else happy. I thought about myself. I had spent so much of my life solving other people's problems that I had forgotten what peace felt like. I knew I could not continue living the same way. If nothing changed, nothing would ever become better. I quietly made a few simple decisions. I called my mother and told her I would no longer be coming every weekend. I did not argue or remind her about everything that had happened the night before. I simply said I needed some time for myself. Then I stopped paying the household bills that I had been covering without anyone knowing. I also stepped away from the many family responsibilities I had been carrying for years. I no longer arranged appointments, handled paperwork, paid unexpected expenses, or rushed over whenever someone needed help. I did not do these things to punish anyone. I did not want revenge. I just stopped carrying responsibilities that were never mine alone. I wanted my family to see what life looked like without the daughter they had quietly depended on for so many years. The changes appeared faster than I expected. Within a few weeks, unpaid bills started piling up because nobody remembered their due dates. Important appointments were missed because I was no longer making phone calls and sending reminders. Small problems became big problems because no one was organizing everything behind the scenes anymore. Zuri also began noticing the difference. One afternoon, she admitted that she had never realized how much I had been doing for the family. She had always believed everything somehow took care of itself. She never knew that I was the one making sure everything stayed together while asking for nothing in return. My father became quieter with each passing week. My mother also started realizing how much she had relied on me every single day. They were finally living without the support they had taken for granted for years. For the first time in my life, I was no longer trying to earn love by sacrificing myself. I was choosing peace instead. As my family slowly faced the responsibilities I had once carried alone, they finally began to understand that my kindness had never been small. It had been holding the entire family together all along. Several months passed before I saw my mother again. During that time, we spoke only a few times on the phone, and every conversation was short and polite. I stayed focused on my work, my friends, and the peaceful life I was slowly building for myself. Then one Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, I found my mother standing there alone. She looked older than I remembered. Her eyes were red, and she held her handbag tightly in both hands. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I stepped aside and quietly invited her in. She sat on my sofa and looked around my apartment. It was clear she had not come to talk about marriage this time. After a long silence, tears slowly rolled down her face. She looked at me and said, "Nia, I did not come here because you are unmarried. I came because I finally understand what I have lost." I stayed quiet and let her continue. She admitted that she had spent years looking at my life through the eyes of other people instead of seeing the daughter standing right in front of her. She confessed that she had measured my happiness by society's rules instead of asking what truly made me happy. She said she now understood that every joke, every comparison, and every hurtful comment had slowly broken my trust in her. She did not make excuses. She did not blame anyone else. She accepted responsibility for her choices. She admitted that she had failed to protect me when I needed her most. Instead of standing beside me, she had become another person, making me feel that I was not enough. I listened to every word without interrupting. I believed her apology was honest, but honesty could not erase years of pain in a single afternoon. Trust is not rebuilt with one conversation. It takes time, patience, and changed actions. I gently told her that I appreciated her coming to see me and telling me the truth. I also told her that forgiveness did not mean everything would immediately return to the way it was before. Some wounds need time to heal. My mother quietly nodded. For the first time in many years, she was not asking me to change my life. She was asking for the chance to become a better mother, one step at a time. I did not wake up one day and suddenly have a husband or a perfect ending that proved everyone wrong. My life did not need a wedding to become valuable. I had already built a life that I was proud of. I had meaningful work that gave me purpose, friends who stood beside me during my hardest moments, and a peace that I had worked very hard to protect. For years, I believed I needed my family's approval to feel complete. I thought if they accepted my choices, praised my success, or finally understood my struggles, then I would feel whole. But after everything that happened, I learned something important. My happiness could not depend on someone else's opinion. I had to choose myself first. Slowly, my family began changing. They did not expect me to forget everything overnight. They understood that trust had to be rebuilt through actions, not just words. My mother started calling me simply to ask how I was, not to question my life choices. My father began listening more and judging less. Even Zuri changed the way she treated me. She stopped making jokes about my personal life and started appreciating the sister who had always been there for her. Our relationship was not perfect, but it became more honest. We had real conversations instead of pretending everything was fine. Little by little, my family earned their place back in my life. They finally understood that a woman's worth is not decided by whether she wears a wedding ring or how quickly she follows society's expectations. A person's value comes from their heart, their kindness, their courage, and the way they treat others when no one is watching. Looking back, the hardest moment of my life was also the moment that changed me the most. Standing in that dining room, telling my truth, was not about proving my family wrong. It was about finally accepting my own worth. The greatest truth I ever shared was not the story of the love I lost. It was the truth that I no longer needed anyone's permission or approval to live a complete, meaningful, and beautiful life. If you've ever been judged for choosing a different path in life, share your story in the comments. And if you believe respect should never depend on marriage, age, or status, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable family dramas.